Welcome back to the Paddle and Fin Podcast Network. We're brought to you by Yak Gadget for all your fine quality kayak fishing accessories. Go to yakgadget.com. Pelican cases, coolers, and lighting. Go to pelican.com. And the 153 Bait Company for all your hard and soft bait needs. Go to the 153angler.com. So join with me as together we dive into the tips and techniques that will help make us better anglers out on the water. Welcome back to the Bass Fishing for Noobs segment here on the Paddle and Fin podcast. I'm a little out of practice. Sorry, guys. I'm your host, Sean Lavery. Tonight, I have a special guest. I can't wait to introduce him to you guys. For anybody who doesn't know him, he was nice enough to have me on his podcast, so I figured it only fitting to return the favor. But before I jump into him real quick, I wanted to give you guys a quick update on my fitness journey with Kayak Beast. For those of you guys who might have listened back when Ryan and I were doing the show, I had taken a week off, and he happened to interview Luke Prentice, who is the kind of instructor of the Kayak Beast fitness program. And a couple other people on the Paddle and Fin podcast had used him. Dustin from the saltwater segment had really good results. I think he lost like 38 pounds on the program and really got in some good shape. And so I started the program about 7 weeks ago. I have lost 12 pounds so far, but I think I've gained a lot of muscle. So even though my weight loss isn't as dramatic, I think I was really, I had really let my strength training go. So I had a lot to recover there. So I feel like that's been part of my the weight thing, is just that I've gained so much more muscle than but I've also definitely gone down sizes in my clothing as well. But beyond that, I have a ton of energy. I just had my cholesterol checked for the first time in a while, and my LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, was down at 50, and my cholesterol hasn't been that low for quite a while. So just props to Luke and his program. If you guys are interested, check it out. He's on all the social media platforms. Just look for Kayak Beast, and you'll find his program. And if you guys are like me and, you know, put on a couple of pounds during COVID and kind of let yourself go a little, it's definitely a program worth checking out, because he walks you through everything from diet to exercise, and it's really a good program. So check him out online, Kayak Beast. You can find them all over the place. So I'm pretty sure a Google search will put you right on them. So be sure and check him out. All right. That being said, we'll get to tonight's guest. I know he just recently was on the OG show with Brian not super long ago. And maybe a month or two ago, I was actually on his podcast, the Faith and Fishing podcast. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Cam Steele to the Noobs show. Hello, sir. How are you?
Sean? How's it going, man?
I'm doing pretty good. I was a little under the weather earlier this week, but I'm coming back strong, and so happy to put that behind me. And
sure.
Yeah. So how are you doing, sir?
I am doing well.
Yeah. How's the new kiddo doing?
He is growing like a weed, man. He turned 6 months old yesterday, and seems like he wants to skip crawling altogether and is trying to go straight to walking. So we will see how well I can keep up.
Man, once they're mobile, you're in trouble, brother. I'm sorry to tell you.
Oh man, he's not mobile yet. I'm already struggling to keep up with him.
And man, and you blink and that time just flies by. I mean,
man,
my kids are 16 and 11, and I feel like it was just yesterday that they were in that same stage. So let me tell you, it goes quick. So enjoy every minute of it. So
for sure.
All right, brother. Well, for those of the listeners who either haven't heard you on our show or haven't checked into your podcast, why don't you just introduce yourself, tell folks a little bit about how you got into fishing, and maybe how you got the idea to start your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Cam Steele. I'm the host of the Faith and Fishing podcast. In terms of getting started fishing, it was, my earliest memories are of fishing. with my dad and my grandpa. I was blessed enough to be able to fish with both granddaddy, Grandpa Steele, and my dad. So I've gotten a chance to kind of grow up in it as recreational. Tournament stuff is never really my thing. Was never really Daddy's thing or Grandpa's thing, but we enjoy keeping up with it. We just not really. We're a little too competitive for our own good, so we kind of stay away from it there. But yeah, so in terms of getting started in the podcast, a while back, was listening to Chad Hoop. He mentioned his faith, and I kind of thought that would be a cool podcast, is to kind of give fishermen a chance to talk about what they believe in. And another influencer said that if there's content that you want to see or hear or listen to or whatever that you can't find, it's on you to make it. So I figured it. I guess I gotta make it. So I did.
I think it was definitely a niche that needed to be filled. And I mean, I was really kind of surprised when I first got into the kayak fishing community to see how much faith was kind of intermingled in and how much it was a part of the community. So I think it's definitely a story worth telling. I mean, if it's in the kayak fishing community the way it is, then it has to be widespread through the fishing community as well.
Absolutely, for sure.
Awesome, man. Well, I know I've enjoyed listening to your show, all the different questions that you dive into, and just hearing sides of people, even my fellow paddle and fin hosts. You've had quite a few of us on your podcast now, and just hearing that side of their stories, it's intriguing, and it's neat just to hear their faith journeys and how it compares to mine, and just things that don't come up necessarily in our regular conversation. So props to you for finding that niche and filling it very well. So
well, I appreciate the kind words, man.
No problem. Cam kind of came to me with an idea for a show, and it kind of intrigued me. He was talking about in his area starting to fish a lot of the local parks, the small ponds in these local parks. And I really seemed like a good topic for me at the moment, because I'm guessing maybe, quite a few of the people who listen to this show might be dealing with this as well. But my local waters are completely destroyed right now from Hurricane Ida. The Susquehanna is raging. I just looked right before we started recording. The section right by me is at 166,000 cubic feet per second, and it's normally around 30, so it's 8 times stronger than it normally is, and it's on its way down. It peaked at, I think, 260 some thousand cubic feet per second. So it was flowing like crazy yesterday. It's on its way back down, but probably won't be fishable by kayak this weekend. So I'll definitely be searching for places a little more tranquil. So I kind of thought that was a good segue into that, because odds are they might be a little more murky and have a little higher banks right now, but they're not going to be flowing like crazy like the Susquehanna. So
For sure. Yeah, and I figured, a lot of us start out whenever we're noobs, we start out on the bank and we kind of fish whatever water is available to us. And the city park ponds are a lot of times, that's what we have. And for me, having Henry just having been born, being able to sneak off for an hour as opposed to load the kayak up, go take off for a day, come back, has been the key. And I've got one that's really close to work, so a lot of times I can sneak off from on my lunch break and fish for a few minutes and then come back. So it's been really nice doing that too. So
just enough to scratch that itch, right?
That's right. Just gotta scratch it.
I know exactly what you mean. I've talked a few times on here about it, but we have a small stream that runs by our house that when I take the dog for a walk, if I need to scratch that itch, I just take my tiny little trout rod with a little trout magnet on it and a little like tiny split shot, and I'll stop with the dog and, make a couple casts in there and just see what I can pull out. Usually it's a sunny or a bluegill or something little, but it's still something pulling on the end of the line. So
That's right. And a lot of these little park ponds, you take an ultralight in there with something like that, or like some wax worms or something, you can have a fun time. I've caught 30 fish in 30 minutes doing that, so it's fun, man.
Yep. No, I agree with you. And, it doesn't, for me, it never has to be a huge fish. Do I like catching huge fish? Absolutely. But any fish will do. And if it's a creek chub or, anything. And one of the questions I kind of thought of, because I've been to parks around my local area too. We have quite a few, and a lot of them do have bodies of water on them. My kids did like a library find program where they'd hide a kind of plaque in a park and then give you kind of directions to get to them. So, we'd go to a park to, excuse me, find these plaques. And while we're walking around, I'm like, hey, there's water here, or there's a creek here, or there's a, this here. I wonder if I'm allowed to fish that. Or how did you first find? I know obviously you said potentially you can see the signs of people fishing there, but there's other ways you found that out as well, right?
Yeah, so like you said, walking around the pond, seeing fishing line in all the trees and stuff, um, that's usually a pretty good giveaway. And Another thing was I went on the Google reviews and asked a question. You can ask a question on Google reviews. Are you allowed to fish here? Are you allowed to fish from the bank, or whatever kind of question you want to ask? And I ended up getting a bunch of responses that way. So
Okay.
that's a way to do that. And a lot of times the public places like that, if they don't have a sign, you're good to go. And most of the time, public places like that, if you go and fish, worst case scenario, someone's going to come and say, hey, you're not allowed to fish here. Now it's very different because you're not fishing somebody's private property. I would never suggest somebody go and just wait for someone to tell them they can't do it on private property, but on a public park or something like that, as long as you're being safe, I think worst case scenario, someone comes and say, "Oh, just to let you know, you can't fish here." So,
Right. No, you definitely want to try and be as lawful as you can about it. I remember on the way to my old the place retirement community I used to work at, there was a pretty good sized pond next to an elementary school. And one day on the way home, I was like, you know what, I'm going to stop and just see if there's any kind of signage or anything around it. And I found a sign that said "fish at your own risk." That was the only signage I could find. I'm like, well, if they're saying "fish at your own risk," it's probably allowed. So I stopped there maybe 2 or 3 times in the next couple of weeks and fished just real quickly in the morning on my way to work. And then probably about a month later, there's an article in the local paper about how there's too many people trespassing around this pond, and they were putting up signs then that said no trespassing. And I was like, okay, so I'm not allowed to fish there. But I'm like, the sign's kind of confusing because it says "fish at your own risk." So to me, that sounds like go ahead and do it. Just but yeah. So you have these bodies of water that are fishable. Now you said yours are pressured pretty well.
yeah. Very rarely do I go out there and they're not. They don't have somebody fishing. A lot of times, like if you were to go on like a Saturday morning or like Sunday morning, some of them are so pressured that like you kind of you all go in a circle around the lake or around the pond, just kind of like um, kind of just you fish right behind somebody else. So they a lot of pressure. I mean, you can go in and like I said, just look at the trees. You can see how much pressure they get with how many bad casters are fishing there. So
Nice. And what kind of fish are you finding in these? Does it vary pretty good or?
yeah, it varies. So a lot of them are stocked by the city. So they have bass. Now, I mean, don't expect giants. A lot of times, if you catch a 3 pounder, people are like jaws dropping and staring at you like that's the biggest fish I've ever seen. But yeah, so a lot of times there's some decent fish in there. I mean, some 2.5 pounders that are, they're definitely fun. They turn a lot of heads from the people who have been fishing there for years, didn't know there was fish in there. But there's, and then like we were talking about earlier, this sunfish, and a lot of the times the city will stock like grass carp. Biggest fish I ever caught came out of one of these ponds. It was one of those grass carp. It was just over 25 pounds.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh wow. I can't even
It was
imagine.
34 inches long.
Oh man. I bet you people were watching that then too, because I'm sure he was splashing quite a bit coming in.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Nice. All right. So when you're going, are you taking like ultralight stuff? Or are you taking one of each, or what's your setup usually that you hit these ponds with?
Usually it's, if I figure out what I'm going to fish for before I go. If I'm going to fish for sunfish, I take an ultralight. If we're going to fish for carp, I take a couple medium heavy setups, catfishing setups or whatever, with some corn. And then for bass, so if I'm bass fishing one of these ponds, I like to take one rod. I don't want to have to set down a rod, cast a couple times, pick up another rod, move, cast a couple times, pick up the rod. So usually, depending on the time of year is going to depend on what setup I take, because if it's a time of year that I'm going to be power fishing, I'm going to be power fishing. So that's going to be my bait caster, usually a medium fast action, probably 7 foot to 7.3, something like that. And I'm much better in terms of accuracy and distance with a bait caster. But most of the time, especially in the dog days of summer or wintertime or whatever, it's a medium fast action spinning rod, because that way it's something I can throw something light on it if I need to. If I'm going to be skipping, I know I got to take my spinning setup because I'm not good at skipping on a bait caster yet.
Neither am
I. But that's another thing. If you skip on one of these ponds underneath a overhanging branch or something, that turns heads too. And then so for me, I like straight 15-pound braid. I don't use the fluorocarbon leader or anything because the algae in these ponds, these aren't like ponds that have a stream flowing through them. These are pretty stagnant. So the algae in these ponds stains like if I'm using mono or fluorocarbon, the water stains it.
Interesting.
So it's like a brownish greenish nasty color.
Yep.
And
I was going to ask you about that because I was curious. The few ponds that I have fished have been very similar. Like there's a fireman's pond close to me that I recently just happened to hear one of my friends talking about fishing, and I asked him, "Hey, can I go fish that pond?" And he's like, "Oh, sure." It's a tiny little pond. It's actually where they, I guess, pump some of the water from when they need to fill up their tanker. But that was the first thing I noticed about fishing there was the bottom is just gunk, like
right.
Green, slimy. You don't want to fish anything really that sits on the bottom, otherwise every time it comes back completely covered in snot and nastiness. So
yeah, and it depends on the time of year. Like the springtime, whenever the water first starts warming up, you get a really big bloom of like the slime algae, like the green slime that just kind of pours off like Nickelodeon type slime. And then like this time of year, there's a little less in terms of the algae on the bottom, but around the edges, it's really bad.
okay.
Almost like if you've ever like put eggs into ramen noodles, and like around the edges it's like all like bubbly and weird and nasty looking. It looks a lot like that.
That's an interesting comparison. But yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. So so you're I'm sure then you're picking lures that or techniques that would kind of combat that a little bit a lot of times. So
Yeah, so main thing is I like a long rod so that I can lift the lure out of the water before it gets to that on the edge, because it doesn't matter how weedless it is. If you pull it through that, you're pulling out a bunch of stuff with it.
yeah,
So that's the main thing for me, is that longer 7 foot to 7.3 rod to um, cast it out, get it to that point, and lift it up before it gets to it. That's my little trick for the algae on the edge.
and then yeah, generally you find that when it's on the edge like that, usually the middle is a little more clear, even on the bottom.
Most of the time.
Yeah.
Again, it depends on what kind of algae it is, what time of year. Um,
And are
but
they mostly then soft bottom without the algae, or are they more of a
yeah,
rocky bottom, or does it change up?
it depends on the pond. But most of them have a pretty soft bottom because, like I said, it's stagnant, and you've got leaves that fall in the fall, and they just turn into silt, and so it's a really muddy bottom. But um, yeah, so definitely stay away from real heavy lures. I see people, um, flipping big creature baits on like uh, half ounce weights all the time, and it's like, nah, that's sitting under about a quarter inch of mud there, bud.
Right. Yep. That's funny. So then, like the little pond that I went to, the first thing I tried was the Ned rig, just because I'm like, okay, well, I'll try that. And so out of the couple of ponds that I have fished, the Ned rig worked very well on two of them. But then two of them, even that was almost too much to. Every time I dragged it on the bottom, I ended up having to swim it more than drag it because it would come back covered and stuff. So
Yeah, for sure. If I'm going to throw a Ned rig in one of these ponds, it's going to be during the wintertime.
okay.
The water's a little bit clearer in the wintertime. There's not as much algae. It can't survive in the colder water. So, I mean, we don't get super cold water down here, but uh, but yeah, if I'm going to throw a Ned rig, it's going to be in the wintertime on one of these ponds for sure.
Okay. Okay. I remember, I think I was talking to the online outdoorsman about fishing smaller crankbaits and stuff too in those kind of ponds, like just little stuff that might not dive super deep, but it's enough that, I like to fish moving baits a lot because then I feel like I can really cover water versus sometimes just crawling something along wears on my patience. So, and
Absolutely.
I've had some luck with those. Like I have a little rebel grasshopper looking thing, and that, yep,
So that's the Rebel craw,
yep.
crawfish. That's one of my favorites in these. Um, you're speaking my language whenever you talk little crankbaits. And then that one is from Carl's Amazing Baits. It's the runt. It's pretty much the only thing they make that I really really like. I can't get enough of these things. This is the like, I think it's called it's whatever their sexy shad color is, but their chartreuse bluegill color. I
Okay.
don't have any. I don't have any left, but that's the color I really like. But um, so yeah, in my ponds here in Raleigh, North Carolina, they're, like I said, they're muddy, they're murky. So um, obnoxious colors are going to be a theme here. Um, but yeah, so those are um, those are great. And another thing to keep in mind is I wouldn't fish a lot of expensive lures. Be prepared to lose lures because there is a ton of fishing line tangled up
Yeah.
everywhere, that if you look at a place and it's like, oh, that's a fishy spot, there's a bunch of cover there or something, you're going to get caught on some fishing line. And uh, I'm going to get on my soapbox here for a second. Um, it's okay to not know what to do whenever you are fishing, but from here on out, now that you've heard me, you know what to do. If you get your lure stuck, and you know you cannot get it back, tighten the drag down, pull, pop it off. Do not cut the line at your reel and leave 30 yards of fishing line out there. And another thing is, you do not need 20-pound line, like monofilament line, fishing this stuff. You don't need 20-pound fluorocarbon. You don't need 100-pound braid. I hooked something, and it was like, oh man, this is fishing line. I pulled it in. I like worked getting it up. It had a 3-ounce pyramid weight on it, and it had two. It was like what I would use for surf fishing.
Right, exactly. I was just going to say that.
it was wire.
My goodness.
It was like a steel leader.
Steel leader. I was just going to say.
With like what was left of like what looked like 3/0 hooks. Like this, if you're fishing for anything in these ponds with something like that, you're catching turtles.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So be aware of Big Nasty. All of these things have a bunch of snapping turtles in them. So be prepared to hook Big Nasty once in a while.
I have actually experienced that same thing as well a couple times. The place where I camp counsel at, the lake there, we've caught a few snapping turtles in the lake, and the kids get so excited. Oh my gosh, I got a huge fish, and they're pulling and pulling, and I'm like, I don't think that's a fish. And then sure enough, they pull it, and then I've seen some huge snapping turtles in there, like 2 foot around, and they're like,
the big problem here is they get fed. So we like, you're fishing and like they follow you around.
Oh my goodness.
Because they're expecting to get fed. So don't feed snapping turtles, y'all. don't do that.
That's just asking for trouble. I remember the one time the kid had it hooked and he got it up to the bank and he's like, what do we do? I'm like, well, I'm not going anywhere near his mouth with pliers. I'm like, he's going to snap off my finger. So I cut the line as close as I could to him. I'm like, he's just going to have a lip piercing. That's the way it is. That can go along with his bad attitude, but
I try not to question God's decisions too many times, but bolt cutters with legs are my best. I don't think that was his best idea. Go
ahead.
I don't get like uncomfortable around many things out on the water. I've had snakes fall into my kayak and I just grab them and throw them overboard. Spiders I'm not a huge fan of, but I mean, I can deal with them. Snapping turtles are the one things that just give me the heebie-jeebies.
I used to trout fish at a friend. He was actually from my Little League baseball team. He was a player on my team, and he lived right by this amazing creek to fish. They stocked it, and his house was like right on the bank. So I'd go sleep over at his house, and we'd go trout fishing. And the only thing about right by his area was it was super muddy. So you would just take off your shoes and walk barefoot. And he always used to say, if you feel something move when you put your feet in the mud, get it out of there, because the snapping turtles like to sit in that mud too. And that's all I could think about. And man, the first time I felt something move, I was like, nope, I'm done. I'm going to fish over here. I was like, I am not losing a toe. I don't need to fish there that badly. So
for sure.
But that's good advice about the line too. I've noticed that on the river a ton this year. I don't know if it's catfish, guys fishing for catfish from the shore that are just using heavy line and pretty good size weight. And when I'm fishing close to the shore, a lot of times on the river, if I'm throwing a crankbait, I'm getting it stuck and I'm pulling up line left and right. And when I catch it, I usually try and bring it up and as much as I can. And a lot of times on my kayak, I can get it unstuck because from whatever, I can come at it from a different angle than maybe the guys from the bank can. And so I'll pull it up, wrap it around my hand, and then just throw it in the back of my kayak. And then right where I put in, there's this PVC tube that someone made that says put old fishing line here. So that's usually what I do with it. But I try and take it out when I find it too, because it's so obnoxious. Because at first it feels like a bite, but then it kind of fights back a little bit, but then you quickly figure out that it's fishing line. And so it's definitely good advice. If you can break it off, and don't go overboard. You're not going to need, especially steel leader in a park pond. I'm pretty sure there's nothing in there going to chew through your leader.
For sure.
Besides a snapping turtle. So
right.
So cool. All right. So so what's your strategy generally? You just do you look for a cover, or are you just kind of taking it as you come to it?
So main thing, make sure you've got a good pair of polarized sunglasses, because what you can see in the water is going to make a big difference. If it's during the middle of the day, I'm targeting shade. Um, these ponds don't have a lot of shade most of the time, so I am like this is from Jay's Jigs. This is one of their skirted finesse jigs. I'm taking one of these with like a double tail grub as a trailer, and I'm skipping that under overhanging branches and stuff into the shade. And what I'm doing is I'm fishing it like I would a wacky rig. I'm watching it on the way down, watching the line on the way down. Let it sit on the bottom for a couple seconds, a couple quick hops. Watch the line on the way down. Couple quick hops. Watch the line on the way down. Reel it in. Skip it back under there. Watch it on the way down, just like a wacky rig. So that's usually if I know it's going to be a tough day, or if it's like whenever I'm fishing on my lunch break in the middle of the day, that's what I'm starting with.
Okay.
If I notice, the great thing about these double tail grubs as a trailer is if I notice that they're chasing it a lot, these work as like swim jigs too. I can just swim it, and that gives it action that way too. Jay's Jigs has a bunch of different colors. That one's the one I like the most. It's called cross-eyed cricket.
That's pretty.
But and then they've got ones like that are made to mimic shad. So put like a little finesse swim bait on that. You can swim that, and that'll come through cover pretty well if you're paying attention as you're going through. So that's going to be something. If I'm going real early in the morning or as the sun is going down, the popper.
I was just going to say that sounds like a top water time.
So fishing the popper on these ponds is really productive for me, because I feel like so many people don't do it right. This is one of the reasons that straight braid is important to me. So a popper is something I want to cast as close to cover as I can and leave it there. But whenever I'm using like mono or like a poly or something like that, any kind of line memory means that it's going to spring back and it's going to pull that popper away from the cover. So braid is going to stay right there, and I can give it a pop, and you're looking for that gloop sound. So in my opinion, the Rebel Pop R is as good as it gets. And that baby bass color is, like I said, these are stock ponds. They don't see much other than bass and bluegill, or whatever sunfish they're stocked with. So the baby bass is going to be one of the main forages for bigger bass. So that baby bass color has been big for me. If I'm going to be doing topwater, another one that I like is the tiny torpedo from Hedden, and just kind of throw that out there, and I straight retrieve that just across the surface real slow. Another big one for me is inline spinners. The So for these ponds, it's small stuff like that is going to be key. One thing I will say with that is using like a snap swivel makes a big difference on that. Because like for instance, this one I tied straight on,
Mm-hmm.
and a couple of times last time I was fishing it, the line wrapped around. I don't know if this is long enough to do it, but the line wrapped around the blade like that.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever it spun, the whole thing spun and created line twist.
Mm-hmm.
So snap swivels are big there. Beetle spins are, I mean, if you were getting into fishing of any kind, um, a beetle spin is the best $1.50 you're going to spend. And that black with the yellow stripes, that's the main one I use. But yeah, that's pretty much my arsenal whenever it comes to fishing these little ponds, unless it's going to be, in the wintertime, whenever it's super cold, I might need to switch to a drop shot and a Ned rig on that.
Okay.
But yeah, in terms of strategy, the main thing I do is I'm walking around with my polarized glasses looking to see what's going on. A lot of these places have a bunch of ducks, and people come and feed the ducks, and they always come to the same spot to feed the ducks. So there's always a bunch of bluegill and stuff in that spot waiting to be fed.
Mm-hmm.
You can see these big schools of bluegill. If you throw something like a little crankbait or a inline spinner or something just on the outside of that, a lot of times there's a bigger bass waiting there, waiting for one of the smaller bluegills to get a little bit too brave and venture away from the school. Um, but and then you can a lot of times, like 2 days after they stock, with fingerlings is an awesome time to throw like a popper or something, because you can see these schools of little fingerling bass everywhere, and every so often you'll just see this little the shine of a bass go through them. So something like a popper, or something where you can kind of stay in that school and look
Right.
like you're or a fluke even, something like that would work really well there. I really like to fish a fluke on a shaky head, um, and kind of look
On a
like a
shaky
little,
head. Okay.
yeah, it just looks like a little fish, like eating on the bottom and
Yep.
like not paying attention, and the bass comes along and
Yep.
so um,
Cool. I mean, a bunch of those baits are definitely some of my favorites too. I'm super close, I think, to getting one of the big inline spinner companies to come on and just do an episode on them, because I feel like they're so overlooked for bass. I mean, I know they're not necessarily, when you think inline spinner, you might not necessarily think it's a bass bait, but I have
right.
had days on the river where I just tore them up on them, and I think it's just such an overlooked bait because it's so easy to throw, and I mean, it flat out catches them for me anyway.
It
So
does. I started out on them, and for me, like my favorite is the Panther Martin, and
that may
that
or may
color,
not be the company that I'm talking to.
and that color right there. I don't remember exactly what they call it. Um, that has I've caught more bass on that color than any other lure. Um, so it it's that, got to remember I'm on a podcast. It's that pinkish and white, with the little dots on it and the fly type tail on the bottom. So
Yeah.
um,
I've done well on the bumblebee colors, like you talked about, the black and yellow. I've done really well on the river with the kind of chartreuse with a bronze blade. I don't know why that combination works well, but for whatever reason, that's my go-to on the river. But the bumblebee color has worked for me as well when if I lose all of my chartreuse ones. But the bumblebee one also, I call it the bumblebee. It's black and yellow. But that one works for me on creeks and stuff too. Yep. So I was thinking, did you ever throw like a popping frog? I've been watching a bunch of frogging videos lately, and it seems like it's a good combination of a popper and a frog to me. I feel
I
like,
have, and I enjoy it. But the thing is, like I said, I like to take one rod,
mhm,
and a a medium heavy is about as low as I'll go on a frog to really get a good hook set with those hooks.
right.
And that's just a little bit as kind of overkill for most of these ponds, in terms of what other lures I would be fishing that day. So I don't do it a lot, but I have done it.
Okay.
If I'm gonna be fishing a frog, I prefer a popping frog for sure.
Cool. I'm just that's one of the few techniques that I haven't done a lot of. So I've been reading a lot about it lately. I have a guest lined up, I think, to do a frogging episode. So it's just something I've been doing a little more research lately. But that makes sense that it might be a little, especially rod wise. Like I don't even own a heavy rod. I'm working on getting one. I have one on order, I believe, that I'm waiting to get yet. But again, I understand the hardware for that is definitely a little different, and you're not going to have nearly as much kind of universal things you can throw on that rod. So that makes sense. Another thing I was thinking about, you mentioned, if you don't have the slime around the edges, one of the best tips I heard about fishing ponds is to always make your first cast from maybe 5 feet back, right to the edge. Because a lot of times, if you walk straight up to the edge, you're going to spook fish that are there.
Oh,
Whereas
absolutely.
if you cast from 5 feet back or as far back as you can, just to hit that edge first before you walk right up to it. That's one I think that was Chad Hoover that talked about that the first time I heard it as well. Um,
Absolutely. So for me, I don't typically get a chance to walk up to a spot that somebody didn't just leave most of the time whenever I'm at these ponds. But if I'm there and I realize I'm the first one there, absolutely, I'm casting from a ways back, because I do see them, spook off from there on a regular basis. Another little tip that, now this is something that if you um, if you're not an accurate caster, don't do this, and I wouldn't recommend doing it with treble hooks. But follow the ducks. A lot of times you see like ducks that are like eating on the side on the edge and stirring up a big cloud of dirt there. Um, don't try to cast right next to them, but wait until they move off a little bit and cast into that cloud, with something like a little jig or something, because a lot of times these bass, I'm seeing like one of the ponds I fish has a few Muscovy ducks that stay there, and I think they're pets of somebody who lives near them. But they go and they make a mess on the side, stirring up this big cloud of silt, eating on little bugs and stuff. And you look right behind them, and there's two bass that are like sitting there waiting for one of those little bluegills or something to dart out from there,
mhm.
um, and they're grabbing them. So um, wait until the duck moves a little bit, cast into that cloud, and like make a quick jerk. And whenever that bait like flies out from that, um, a lot of times that'll get the attention of that bass, and then that bass will come and grab it. So
Cool, cool. I don't know. Have you ever heard of the Realistic Fisherman? He's another YouTuber. He's kind of has a crazy long beard. He does a lot of bank fishing, and he seems to have a lot of luck too. And so I've tried to. I don't go bank fishing as much as I used to. Now that I have my kayak, I almost always try to go out. But there's definitely times, whether it's weather or just time or what have you, that I am kind of stuck to the bank. And so I mean, he started out, you know, he always threw a lot of lures that I never would have thought to throw from the bank. And because when I've bank fished now, maybe it was more inexperienced than anything, but I felt like I got snagged a ton. Like almost everything and anything I threw, for the most part, I would snag. And so I avoided treble hooks like the plague, because I felt like, well, that's just three times as more likely to snag. So, but now that I'm a little more comfortable, I should go back to that. But for anybody who's looking for bank fishing techniques and stuff, I'd recommend his YouTube channel.
Awesome.
He's an interesting guy. He definitely tells it like he is. He's a little uh, uh, crass at sometimes, but I mean, he is what he says he is. Realistic fishing.
All
He
right.
he tells it like it is. Um, so yeah. Anything else you think we should cover? I'm trying to think. I know. I mean, I've actually had a lot of luck with live bait too. In those kind of scenarios.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So that's usually something if I know I'm going to be bank fishing, I'll usually try and bring along, just because I feel like it kind of ups my odds. And normally I'm not going to be fishing for any kind of tournament or anything if I'm going to be bank fishing. So I don't necessarily mind having live bait as much, especially if I bring my kids, because I know, live
Oh
bait
yeah, for sure.
for kids generally is going to catch them more fish than artificials. But I also don't want them to be the whole where they just kind of cast it out and just sit there. And because to me, that's the fishing I started with, when the few people that I did get to fish with when I was little. That was how they fish. And so for the longest time, I didn't think I liked fishing, because I didn't like sitting there watching a bobber or that kind of thing. So
Right.
I try to limit that as much as I can too. But that being said, I think live bait does work.
It definitely does. And when you're doing that, so I use live bait a lot for the sunfish. I use little wax worms on a little hook. While you're doing that, if you can see them, pay attention to how the bass are reacting to that school of bluegill. Whenever the bluegill, they hear that little plop and they all rush to it. Um, Watch how the bass react to that. So that will kind of give you an idea of um, how they're reacting to the bluegill. You can watch the bluegill know what the bass are doing.
Mm-hmm.
So even whenever you're fishing for bass, you can tell a lot about what the bass are doing by what the bluegill are doing. And usually
Right.
they're the ones that are much easier to see. They're out in the open, up against the bank, um, not quite as well camouflaged as a bass. So they're usually a lot easier to see, and a lot of times you can tell what the bass are doing by the behavior of the bluegill, just by going um, and fishing for bluegill for a little while and watching what the bluegill are doing, and then seeing how the bass react to that.
It is interesting how bluegill seem to be not nearly as shy as bass can be. But I remember that. Man, I forget. We went to a nature preserve one time, and I ended up with a real light, ultralight rod and just a pack of worms, and we were just pinching off like half-inch pieces of these worms, putting it on a tiny little hook, and it was just like you could watch the bluegills kind of fight over it, and you were guaranteed a bluegill every time you cast. And I was just thinking, man, if I was a bass, I would be just sitting there on the outskirts of that, just waiting for one to get a little way from the pack, and easy lunch. So
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, I mean, most of these ponds aren't very deep, so keep that in mind whenever you're choosing your techniques. Uh, Most of them, if they get to 6, 7 feet, um, I highly doubt they do. Um, at least the ones here that I'm fishing. Keep in mind that I'm talking about the ponds that I fish. I mean, there's a lot of ponds all over the country. They're all going to be different, so keep that in mind. Um, but another thing is and this is really, really, really hard for me, and that is to slow down.
mhm.
Whether you're fishing a moving bait or whether you're fishing a finesse bait on the bottom, um, uh, slow down. A lot of times I am um, I'm fishing way too fast, especially with something like a little finesse jig or something. I'm sitting it there and I keep hopping it instead of, twitching it. Sometimes that twitch is what they need. So
And along with that, I would think the online outdoorsman was the one who told me this was just keep in mind of how much your twitches move it. Like for those little finesse baits, if you move the tip of your rod, 4 inches, it's making that bait hop a ton. And he's like, whereas if you're just lightly flicking or just barely twitching it, it's going to be much more natural movement. He's like, you don't see bait fish doing these huge 4-inch 6-inch hops. So he's like, just keep in mind to like watch your rod tip, and as much as your rod tip is moving is how much that bait is moving. So if you can picture on the bottom the bait doing exactly what your rod tip is doing, that helps me anyway, keep from imparting too much action on it, which I think a lot of times I have a tendency to do.
the part I have trouble remembering is that if I am feeling the weight of the lure on these finesse lures, it's in the middle of the water column. So I got to try and remember that. But
yeah, and that's where like when I switch from like wacky rigging to finesse stuff, I really have trouble because when I wacky rig, I usually use a weighted wacky rig hook. So I like to feel that because I know then when I'm twitching it up, and I can then let it fall. And then when I twitch it up again, I know where it is. Whereas when I use a Ned rig and stuff, I just have to get to comfortable either knowing how long it's going to hit and what the line does when it bellows out, when it, you can tell that lure hits the bottom. So it really does make a big difference depending on the type of lure you're throwing, and especially the weight of the lure you're throwing. So
absolutely.
All right, man. Well, I'm trying to think of anything else we should cover on this. I definitely now want to go out and try some ponds, at least just to see what's out there, because I feel like I don't see a ton of people fishing them. And so I'm first going to have to check and see if you're even allowed, because I feel like we have a ton of parks doing these library finds and stuff with my kids. I've been to a ton of parks that have water. Some of them I've obviously fished because they're lakes and they have big bodies of water, and I've definitely fished there. But some of the smaller ones have ponds and stuff, and so that's definitely something I'm going to look into, because it, like you said, if you don't have enough time to go through the process of loading up the yak and going out and spending 3-4 hours, if you can just get away for an hour or 2 hours and just enough to scratch that itch, I think it's a perfect outlet, even just to break the tension, or just get some stress out.
Yeah, for sure. One last thing, it may sound mean, but if you can find someone that it's like, it looks like they almost know what they're doing. Maybe they're fishing just a little bit too fast. Fish right behind them with something really finessey, and because they've already gotten the bass's attention, their lure was moving too fast for the bass to realize it wanted to catch it. So throw something finesse out there right behind them and see. They may get a little frustrated with you, but a lot of times you can end up having a pretty decent day that way.
I remember fishing right behind a guy who was throwing a whopper plopper, and I was throwing just a regular Rico popper, and I was catching fish behind him, and he kept turning around and being like, "What the heck are you doing that I'm not doing?" And I'm like, "Dude, it's just I don't think they want it moving as fast as the whopper plopper's moving, man. And you just need to either pause your whopper plopper and start it up again, or just try popping it, like you would a popper." And I just continued to, I was following him up the bank. He was in his kayak and I was in mine, probably about 20 yards behind him, and I just kept pulling him out. And every time he'd turn around, he's like, "Oh my gosh," so. Well, Cam, I wanted to ask you a question too. You did a lot of questions on when I was on your podcast. So one of the questions I've kind of asked some of my guests, and I kind of gotten away from it, but I'd like to get back to it, is if you could think about it, what's the best piece of fishing advice you've gotten, or advice in general? It's something I think can extrapolate to life in general. But if it's just fishing, that's fine too.
Okay. As far as fishing goes, slow down has got to be the best one. It is the one I have the most trouble following. Because I mean, I've got to think about how much line, like especially whenever I'm using a bait caster. If I'm using a 7.5 to 1 gear ratio, and let's let's say it's pulling in 3 feet of line per rotation, and I'm burning that thing. That little beetle spin is moving at like 3.5 miles an hour, and those bass are going, "What was that?" I don't know.
I ain't never seen anything like that around here, Yeah.
It's like, I didn't know stuff could move that fast. So that, and also with finesse stuff, that's the part I have the most trouble with is, leaving it there that extra little bit. One thing these little ponds are great for is, they're shallow enough that you can make a short cast and watch your lure and see how it is acting with this little bit of a twitch, or this tiny little bit of a twitch. And I will say I am much better at finesse whenever I am sight fishing in the springtime uh, on beds, whenever I can see my lure and how it's reacting, than I am in the summertime whenever it's murky brown and I can't see what's going on down there. So having that knowledge of what your bait is doing whenever you do this versus that,
Especially when you can see it disappear. That's my favorite thing. When I can see my lure and all of a sudden, poof, it's gone. I'm like, oh, it's in a fish's mouth.
Absolutely.
Cool, man. Well, I think that's definitely good advice. We just did our jig show, and that was one of the big things that I heard over and over again about fishing a jig is if you think you're fishing it too slow, slow down because you're not fishing it slow enough. So
I struggle with jigs still, but I didn't start having success with jigs until someone told me to think of it like a really heavy wacky rig. And at that point, I kind of understood it a little bit better.
That makes sense. Yeah.
You kind of, you're watching your line and you're, um, you kind of do that same kind of motion. It's just getting to the bottom a whole lot faster.
Yeah, you're definitely you're targeting the bottom a lot more than a wacky rig would. But yeah, that makes sense. It is a very similar movement once you're down there. So cool, man. Well, thanks again for coming on. Do you? I definitely let you shout out your podcast because it is amazing. I definitely, if my listeners haven't checked you out yet, you've talked to a ton of amazing people, and hearing the face side of their stories is amazing. So where can the folks find that?
Absolutely. So we're on all of the major podcast platforms: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, Stitcher, and a few of the other ones too. And so yeah, just it's faith apostrophe in. There is faith space apostrophe in space fish apostrophe in, or just faith and fish. And you can check out the website. It's faith the letter N fish the letter N dot wixsite.com/podcast. It's a long one because it's free. And yeah, so check us out on Instagram. It's at Faith and Fishing Pod. Facebook is Faith and Fishing. Join the Faith and Fishing group on Facebook. We try to ask the question, how can we pray for you this week? How can we pray for each other this week? And kind of share our fishing adventures and keep each other in prayer and stuff. It's growing pretty fast, and it's really awesome to see all the new faces. So would love to see y'all up there too. So yeah, one thing I definitely want to do. I've been on the OG show, like you said. I've been on Off the Water, and I have yet to thank my listeners on this podcast. So I want to thank everyone who's listened to the podcast, whether you've listened to it once or whether you've listened to every episode that's come out. It means the world to me that you're listening. So definitely want to say thank you to y'all. Thank you to Save Your Outdoors and Jade's Jigs and Get Outdoors, Pedal and Paddle. Some great sponsors of the podcast. I wanted to do something special for y'all too. We've got a merch store, so we've got t-shirts and stickers, hoodies. So you can go to the website, click on the shop tab, and it'll take you right to it. And if you so this podcast goes up this coming Monday, is that right?
That's right. Yep.
2 weeks from Monday, this is going to expire, but use promo code Noobs. It'll get you 20% off of anything in the store. So
awesome.
Well, I think it's anything. Teespring just raised their prices, so they won't let a discount work if it eats into their cut. So
right.
If 20% is too much on something small like a sticker or something, it may not work, but I think it'll work on everything.
Cool. Awesome, man. Well, again, thanks so much for coming on. I think you're doing great things. I love the product spotlight thing that you do. Jay's Jigs is relatively new. You just got them, right? Not too long ago.
Yeah. We have been, let's see, I guess it's been about a month and a half, something like that.
Okay.
But they've been awesome. Joey's been on the podcast now.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they're running a big Labor Day sale right now. Everything's 20% off over at jaysjigs.com. So make sure whenever this comes out, I think you've got until midnight tonight to go check that out. So do that. But for
awesome. Sure. Well, Cam, thanks so much for coming on, man. It's been awesome. So guys, go on and check out Cam's podcast, Faith and Fishing. I'll make sure I'll put the link to that in the show notes when this comes out, and you guys can definitely go check him out if you haven't already. So thanks again, man. It's been awesome.
Everyone, thank you for having me on.
No problem, brother. Anytime. Well, I'll definitely have to have you back because you have the knowledge that goes along with everything. So, all right, guys. Well, this has been the Bass Fishing for Noobs segment on the Paddle and Fin podcast, where we bring you the techniques, the tricks, and the tips to help you rip more lips. And we will catch you later. So I'm just looking for my outro. I always skip the outro. There it is. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for tuning in to another killer episode on Paddle and Fin. Don't forget to go check out our website at paddle_n_fin.com. Don't forget to check out the YouTube channel at Paddle and Fin. If you got a question, comment, want to hear from a future guest on a future episode, feel free to email us at paddle_n_fin@gmail.com. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Paddle and Fin on Facebook and Instagram. Shout out to our show supporters, Angler. The Angler button and app just makes for a better time on the water and creates a virtual logbook for every fishing outing out on the water. Shout out to Rocktown Adventures, located in Northern Illinois, for all your kayaking, camping, and hiking needs. Shout out to Jigmasters Jigs. When in doubt, get the jig out. Go to jigmasters.com